Today we are going to have a look at a real freaking treat. This is Geometric Futures Model 8, a totally unconventional case that completely switched up all the tested and tried methods, but still resulted in a not only beautiful but also surprisingly high performance case. Across the whole lineup there are 5 different Model 8 variations: the Dharma, Lohan, CowBoy, Celluloid and Bohemia. From a feature set standpoint, they are all practically the same thing. The differences lie within color choices and material usage. The Dharma, for example, has a brushed aluminum front, and the last few centimeters of each side panel are also made from the same material instead of just tempered glass that covers the rest of it. The Lohan case, on the other hand, does not have that side panel split up. The front is matte black and the sides are all glass. Then there is the Bohemian, whose front side is covered in fabric? I really don't know how that stuff looks like in real, but it's, at the very least, it's hella unique. So across the whole lineup there will be no performance or compatibility differences. The Bohemian might be a little more airflowy thanks to the fabric instead of full material in the front, but that's really just a guess cause I didn't have one yet, so I'm not sure what's behind that thing. But even with that, it's really the same case, just different styles. The one we are going to have a look at today is the CowBoy. This one comes with a brushed aluminum front side, 2 tempered glass side panels covering each side, and get this, real, genuine, high-class cattle hide. This comes with leather, freaking leather! Before any activists arrive and call me out on getting leather on something, if you hate me now, you should have hated me a long time ago. I was able to choose which Model 8 we are getting, and there is a reason why this one got the job. About a year ago I got one of the brand's newsletter mails, and the subject was something along the line of cows had to die for this, or animals had to die for this, and you cannot imagine how quickly I smashed that button. Like, I love how they do stuff, and I do love how this looks. On the website, Geometric Future explains that the color and the overall look will change over time, and if we just assume that the leather they use on here is somewhat the same stuff that the brand uses, well then yes, it definitely will get darker over time. Plus it has this really cool effect of like absorbing scratches. Like if I scratch my phone now, you have an obvious scratch now here. We will have another look at this at the end of the video, and you will see it will partially in half an hour, but in an hour or two it will be completely gone. It really works amazing. Anyway, on the left we have leather, on the right we have leather, and on the top where we have the I/O, we have freaking leather. If this is for you, that's really your choice. I can just say that it looks freaking awesome and very well executed. But enough of the design talk, let's get to the really important case stuff. The Model 8 comes in the usual brown box with a logo and some text. Once the case stands on the table, we are looking at a 500mm high, 230 wide and 500mm deep case. Yes, that's quite unusual, but the case is really as high as it is deep. In the front top of the case we can find the I/O, and that one really gives us a first peek at what this case is about. A highly clicky power button in the same color as the leather, 2 USB 2.0 Type A's, a separate audio in and out, 2 USB 3.0 Type A's, a mini reset button, and a 10 gig USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type C. Wow, I'm getting really good at saying those long names. This is everything that can be in a front I/O panel. It's great! As mentioned before, both sides of the case are covered in a 4mm thick tempered glass side panel, which is also heavily, and I mean heavily, tinted. You can not even see half of what's inside of it. You just see the ARGB, it's really tinted. It's not quite black, but it's really dark, and it like makes the ARGB not look too much like flashy. To remove them, it's the usual thing. Unscrew in the back, pull back and remove. Inside, we will find out why this case is really not your usual case. Instead of the traditional layout of having the motherboard I/O come out in the back of the case, the Model 8 uses a completely different approach of rotating the motherboard by 90° clockwise, making it come out in the top. Now this changes a lot of stuff and also required Geometric Future to design many things a lot differently. But they did a hell of a job in here. Starting off with the easy part, being as long and as high as the Model 8 is, we got motherboard compatibility for everything under the sun. Mini ITX, M-ATX, regular ATX and E-ATX on SSI-EEB. SSI-EEB, yes. So do whatever you want in here. By rotating it, we now also have the I/O coming out in the top. And they found a really cool way to make this happen. In the top, behind the I/O panel, we have this removable mesh filter. And behind that we will then find all of the motherboard I/O, but here is the really cool part. They also kept the back exhaust fan. How cool is that? This way the top is not only utilized for I/O exclusively, but we will also get the automatic bottom in, top out approach, a chimney approach, which is really cool and makes this perform very well by default. In the back we have an additional hole that allows you to make all your cables pass through and out in the back of the case. How they did the power supply is also quite cool. Nowadays most cases have their PSU in the bottom inside a separate compartment. For the Model 8 however, they kinda used the old pre-2010 approach, but rotated it by 90° and made it a lot better. The PSU can be mounted inside of this separate compartment on the right side of the motherboard or directly behind the front panel. But the compartment does not go all the way down until the bottom of the case. Although this comes with a restriction, they did the right call here. Due to its length, we can go with up to 220mm long PSUs. Yes, this is not a do what you want, but given that Be Quiet's Dark Power Pro 1200 watt PSU is 200mm long, it's really more like an information than it is a actual restriction. On the flip side, not going all the way down allows us to ram additional fans and radiators in the bottom, which is no doubt the better option. But I'm not done. What they also did is give the PSU giant perforation holes towards the motherboard. And this is the coolest aspect about this. Inside the usual case, a PSU would pull air through the bottom of the case through a mesh filter, then press it through the PSU and out in the back. Which is fine. But let's be honest, a regular PSU doesn't really get that hot, and this approach now uses the PSU and its fan as an automatic exhaust fan. It pulls the hot air from within the case and blows it out into that mesh filter in the top, where it is then moved out by the mesh. Which is great, it's an additional exhaust for free. What Geometric Future kinda did is take the one single positive aspect that the really old case designs had with the PSU in the top back and then give it some 2022 level of style. Great approach, helps a lot by doing literally nothing. Coming to the GPU, as the GPUs are just dangling down from the top, we are essentially utilizing the complete case height for it, either by using the regular 7 reattachable PCIe brackets or using the 3 additional ones, which inside of a regular case would count as a vertical mount, but inside of here it kinda just rotates it. It's also kind of a vertical, but not really, because it's turned 90° and you can see it, the whole thing, which in my opinion is one of the best use cases, but we will get later on, we'll get to this. For the length, Geometric Future went kinda nice on the spec sheet. According to them, you can go with up to 400mm long cards using the normal 7 slots, or 412 if you are taking the 3 extra ones, because they are slightly elevated compared with the other ones. Now what they say is not wrong, but it's not taking into account for any fans in the bottom at all. 400 or 412 is the full case height from the inside, from the PCIe brackets. Add a bottom fan and now we are down to 375, which is still a lot, don't get me wrong. It's just that more or most case manufacturers will take into account the front fans when they state some GPU length. So still, you can still do whatever you want in here. 375 is more than enough for 99% of cases. But this can become an issue if you are going insane. 60mm rad, dual push-pull 30mm fans, and add all of that together and now you're down to 280. So this is only a restriction for the insane folks. For the CPU, it's surprisingly average. Up to 170, still good, yes, but a Nokia NHD15 is 168 by default. Add RAM, that doesn't look like it's coming straight from AliExpress, and now you're above that. But on that note, I also believe that this is an AIO favorable case, but before we can talk about that, let's just finish up the fan support. The bottom of the case can support up to 3 140s or 3 120mm fans. They can be mounted from the bottom after removing this gigantic and very high quality mesh fabric dust filter. And by the way, I love that you don't need to like pull it through some random ass slot and it just like hangs onto everything. No, this is just one giant piece, magnets, great, I love that. But it's actually the back side which is the coolest point for me. From top to bottom, the complete panel is covered in those gigantic perforation holes. So, okay, now I need to say something about this. I just love the ridiculous consistency that Geometric has in all of their products. Kinda quickly missed is that Geometric Future uses that O from their logo that looks like a square with rounded off corners as the favicon of their website. Now you can find this square everywhere. They use it on the back of their Squammer fans. They use it as the button of the Squammer fans ARGB controller. They include a little leather badge with the CowBoy case. The perforation holes on the PSU have them. The big fan gaps in the bottom have it. The power button is shaped exactly like that. And in the back we have exactly 426 of those mini Geometric Future logos going from top to bottom, plus 33 smaller ones on the side. And yes, I counted them. And you think I'm done, but God no. The screws that keep the side panel in place, Geometric Future logo. The plastic cutouts that keep the bottom dust filter in shape, Geometric Future logo. Like it's ridiculous at this point, but that's one level of devotion that I really respect. But back to the back fan spots, cause they are really cool. The back fans are mounted using 2 of those rails. To use them we need to remove the 6 screws from the back, and from there we can take up to 3 fans and mount them to those rails and then reposition everything back in and then just screw it back. Now the really cool thing about this is that these rails do both 120 and 140mm fans. If you want to use bigger fans, just rotate one of the rails and then use the other holes to keep the brackets in place, and voila! 3 120s or 3 140s, everything using the same rails. Plus, close to perfect air pass-through, like this is really airflowy and I like what they did here. For water cooling, this case offers some really cool stuff too. The bottom can support an up to 360 or 280mm rad. As surprisingly often, my regular 420 Alpha Cool Radiator vehemently disagrees. What is it with case manufacturers and forgetting that not every radiator has to have like ridiculous borders on both sides? It will fizz. Anyway, 360 or 420, by spec, just don't go like with 2 enormous ones. The back spot can take 420s or 360s as well, but just keep in mind that if you do dual rad, they will often overlap, so you need to pay attention with the thickness plus the amount of fans. And don't forget that the back spot overlaps with the PCIe brackets, so there we are looking at max 65mm total, or until you hit the GPU for 360 or smaller rads. And on a small side note, inside this puppy right now we have an Arctic Liquid Freezer 420 with 3 140mm Nokia industrial fans. And an Arctic Liquid Freezer is 38mm and the Nokias are 25, so we are looking at, in theory, 63, but on Nokias we have those rubbers on both sides and they will add a millimeter, so we are probably at exactly 65, and I can tell you this was one hell of a squish to get in. So 65 is really the absolute limit if you don't have anything on top of the fan like a rubber. The bottom has the same kind of restriction by hitting the PSU shroud after 11 centimeters on 140 base rads, or 12 for 120s. But hey, try to find a 100mm thick rad. The last fan spot is the one at the top, which inside a normal case would be like the back exhaust. 120, and that's it. Or 120 rads if you really want to do that, but it's kind of a waste inside of a giant case like this one. Now, before we go to the good and bad, let's also talk a bit about the airflow path approaches that you can do in here, because it's not a regular case and you really need to like rethink what you would usually do. Now, starting off very easy. The bottom, all intake, like makes sense for any configuration and will just create issues if you make it an exhaust. The top, also very easy, exhaust. It just makes a lot of sense. No matter if AIO or air cooler, just make it exhaust, otherwise you will fight nature. For air coolers, bottom intake, top exhaust makes the most sense. You will basically create like a straight chimney design with cold air coming in like from the bottom and then into the cooler and being immediately pushed out from the top, and it works perfectly fine. Perfect. Now the back spots, they are a bit of a rough patch. Let's say you go with an air cooler and the GPU is mounted in a normal direction, a normal orientation. The problem is, if you would use all of them as exhaust, the first two from the bottom would just blow out cold air that the first two from the very bottom just provided. So congrats, you achieved nothing. Making matters worse, if your GPU is oriented with the fans facing back, the back exhaust and the GPU will just fight for the tiny rest of the air provided. So no matter how you look at it, with the GPU facing the normal way, back exhaust is a terrible idea. In that case, the only way I see it is to use all of them as intake. That way you will provide the GPU with fresh air from the back and fresh air from the bottom. The air cooler will get fresh air from the bottom and everything is being pulled out in the top. But instead of having just one fan, we cannot forget that the PSU is thankfully helping. So you will actually have two exhaust fans and you will have positive pressure and everything is making sense. In such a configuration, that's like the only way to go. All intake, top exhaust. Now let's say you rotate the GPU. In that case, the two top spots from the back panel can be exhaust because they won't be fighting with the GPU anymore. But they will help take out the hot air produced by it. The bottom still cannot be exhaust, otherwise it will fight with the intake from here, making zero sense. This corner is basically the equivalent of the top front corner of a regular case. However, in this configuration, don't press the GPU against the glass issue still exists. Just don't do it if you have like the thickest 4090 in existence. Don't do it, no matter what the bottom fans can do, that poor thing will just suffocate. Now in the case for AIOs, don't use A120, that's a given, but the only like location that you can use an AIO would be the back, because the bottom mount will always be below the pump and it will die, and the top one is a 120, which doesn't make any sense. So always go for the back, and then stuff also gets easier. Bottom intake, back exhaust through the radiator, top exhaust, and it's that. However, in this case, you also need to pay attention for the GPU, because if it is rotated regularly, it will fight with the AIO for air. So in this use case, if you really need to mount the GPU regularly, use the radiator as exhaust, otherwise it will fight with the GPU, or the best case scenario is exactly what we did here. Exhaust, exhaust, exhaust on the radiator, intake, 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 rotate the GPU. Very easy, works fine. And if you really need to use the back ones as intake, don't forget that it doesn't have a dust filter on it. So if you use them as intake, be prepared to clean it regularly. Oh, that was a lot to take in. Hard drives and SSDs. Behind the motherboard we got 4 of those brackets with the Geometric Future logo screws. The consistency is... On each of those brackets we can mount either a 2.5 or 3.5 inch drives, which is something I haven't seen done before. Yes, this thing has enough space in the back to fit a full hard drive. But keep in mind that not every spot can do everything. In total, there are 6 spots in the back. You could theoretically mount 6 SSDs if you were to buy 2 additional brackets. However, what you can't do is use 3.5 inches using the left 2 spots. There just isn't enough space given the orientation. What you can do though is 2 3.5 inches on the top 2 and another 3.5 inch if you relocate one of the left brackets to the center spot in the bottom. So you are essentially looking at max 3 3.5 inch drives plus potential 3 SSDs or just 6 SSDs. All under the assumption that you will get another 2 brackets after the fact. It's just kind of weird that Geometric Future says up to 6 3.5 inch drive trays. Like, yes, you have 6 trays and you can mount 6 hard drives. They will just not fit in anymore. Generally, the case is really cool, and if configured correctly, this is one hell of an airflow machine. But there are also things I didn't believe were such a smart move. Cable management, for example. On one end, behind the motherboard, there is a freaking lot of space. Of course there is. You're able to mount 3.5-inch drives in there. But given the extremely high quality of the case, why are there no rubber protections around the cable holes? Sure, there are a lot of them, and they are quite big, some of them at least, but we will get to that. But still, I kind of feel like that's missing. But the real issue begins in the back. All across the back of the motherboard plate, there is a total of 0 spots for zip ties. Sure, you will get a bunch of geometric Velcro strips, which is nice, but except for just bundling cables, the only spots you could mount these to is through these enormous slits, which, depending on the motherboard size, would be either impossible to install once the board is in, or would just be seeable from the front, which I believe is a very stupid move. Why is there nothing like on top of the metal which I cannot see from this side? On a side note, can somebody explain to me what this is? I tried figuring it out for hours, but I just can't understand where to mount these to. What is this? It looks like a holder for a clip-in system. What clip-in system? But my biggest concern is due to the power supply. Once you install it, you will find out that there is like 2 solid fingers of space between the front panel and the power supply. Totally wasted space. And on the other side of it, the PSU is still not hard pressed against the shroud. So again, waste of space. And this becomes really annoying once you realize the ridiculous size of the CPU power cable hole. Like, depending on your motherboard, you will get it in. I got it in here, but if you have like a motherboard with a giant VRM heatsink, it's no. And in those cases, it would also be an instance where you absolutely need to route the cable before you mount down the motherboard, or you would just not be able to get it in. And that's something that I think is okay for smaller form factor cases, but once you see that there is a centimeter here, 2 centimeters there, and you just calculate all of that together, you're like, yeah, that hole could have been a lot bigger. And then you realize that the interior could also have been a lot bigger, making routing cables as a whole a lot easier, and it just kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. So no, although cable management is quite easy due to the amount of space you have in the back and just inside of the case, it feels like a missed opportunity where Geometric Future could have done a bit better. And as we are already on the way of not well executed things, the bottom fan spot. I get the geometric logo, that looks kind of fun and all, but it just takes away air. There is nothing necessary about this. And I strongly believe Geometric Future should have done exactly the same they did in the back, plus also take a closer look at the 140mm spots. They do nothing. The only extra air intake you will get from these, in comparison to the 120s, is the slit of the 120. That's ridiculous. Using 140s instead of 120s in the bottom is just useless. In the back, it's amazing. And let's not forget that there is not really a nicely hiding cable hole for the cables coming from the bottom fans. You will either have to route them through these holes, which makes them visible at all times, or use a ton of extensions and then use the one in the back, which adds more extensions and makes them visible again. So as cool as the bottom looks like, Geometric Future should have definitely done exactly the same thing they did in the back, plus give it a hole at the very bottom. Would have made so much more sense. The last thing that I really did not enjoy is the panel removal process. Every part of the case is kept in using these little knobs that are pushed into a hole. Generally, it's not that much of a bad thing. The problem is that these knobs are round. Therefore, the area that keeps onto things goes all around that knob. And the result of that is that every damn time I try to remove a panel, I push it too much to the back, making it stick again on one end of the knob, which then annoys the hell out of me and can really quickly result in people flinching a bit and then maybe even letting go of the glass, and then it shatters everywhere. So I think they should redo the mounting knobs so that they cannot hold onto the hole again once you pull them out. It's a rail approach which cannot stick would be a much better fit for this. But as we mentioned, quite a lot of potential upgrades. Let's also get to the stuff that Geometric Future did really well in here. The quality is for sure number one. Every damn panel is thick, 1mm steel inside, 2mm aluminum on the outside, sturdy AF, excellent. Especially the PSU shroud. That thing is so freaking stiff. The feet are among the most amazing things I have seen. Instead of just having like 4 little sticks, we get 2 giant corners that are lifting the case about 2.2 centimeters. Enough to get air in and out, unwiggleable stand, great. The amount of space in the back, amazing. The back fan spots, perfect. And even the space in the top is well managed. In the bag of goodies, we will also get a weirdly short PSU cable extension, which makes it very easy to connect everything if your own PSU cable isn't like 5 meters long. For the rest, we also got 6 centimeters of space for all of our cables in the top, which is really plenty. We even tried one of those old-ass DVI cables that Jesus himself used to hook up his monitors, and they fit in. Just don't forget that any type of adapter would make it longer, and then you can forget about it. Plus, you will really need to see how thick it is, because the back, like the hole where the cables can come out of the case, is like very limited. So don't use like one of those quality cables, which is like, you know. The amount of RAD support, including thickness, is great, GPU length, motherboard support, all of that very, very well executed. And all in all, it was an extremely easy to build in case. Sure, you need to keep the reverse orientation in mind, and therefore you might need to rethink your fan layout, but if executed correctly, this is one hell of a performer. So as one last big plus, performance. On the could have been better side, rub around the cable holes, ditch the bottom fan mount and do the same thing you did in the back, add some Velcro and zip tie holders in the back which are not seeable, push the PSU mounting a bit back and make the shroud a bit thinner, and maybe add a dust filter to the back panel just in case your setup requires back intake. But for sure, change the panel mounting system. Every damn time I remove it, I'm afraid that I will break something, which just isn't really necessary. But still, with those things in mind, damn, this is one amazing case. And although debatable, I love the design. The leather looks just amazing. The aluminum front looks great. I'm just really into this thing. And oh look, the scratch on my phone is almost gone. Half of it is already gone in what, 40 minutes? Another 40 and it's gone. But okay, this should be it for today about the Geometric Future Model 8 CowBoy Edition. At this point, a huge thank you to Geometric Future for sending it over, but if you want to keep watching, have a look at our take on the Squama 2505 fans. If you need to get something through something else, they can probably do it. On a side note, we also have a Discord server and it's slowly filling up, so if you want to join, there is a link in the description below. Anyway, thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.